Alexander Blackwood. His name alone evoked dark memories in the small coastal town of Brighton, Massachusetts, a town where ancient fishermen's tales mixed with modern nightmares. I remember the scent of salt and decay whenever I walked past the weathered wharves, and I still hear the echoes of whispered accusations. My life, my crimes, and the relentless pursuit that followed had all begun on these rugged shores. I was once a prodigy in the eyes of the society that now reviled me, but that title faded into insignificance on the day my rage and despair claimed an innocent life. I sit in my cell, the chill seeping through the thin concrete walls, and recount the events of that fateful summer. My thoughts travel back to a humid August evening in Bar Harbor, where the Atlantic whispered secrets to those willing to listen. I remember meeting Christopher Reeves at a local diner, a man whose piercing blue eyes belied a deeply troubled soul. It was what he said then, over half-forgotten cups of bitter coffee, that ignited a passion for vengeance in me. The night unfolded in a haze of rain and iron, as I enacted a plan that would forever stain my conscience. Late that night, I crept along the deserted boardwalk of Bar Harbor. The moon was a pale witness to my descent into madness. I saw him, Christopher Reeves, walking with an air of careless defiance. Our eyes met briefly before the inevitable, explosive confrontation. "You always thought you were better than us, didn't you?" I hissed, voice trembling under the weight of every suppressed emotion. "Maybe this is the only way you'll ever know what it means to suffer." His reply was lost in the roar of crashing waves, swallowed by the darkness. I still recall the flash of lightning that illuminated his final expression, a look of bewilderment that haunted me in the silent hours of my solitude. Yet, our tale did not end with that singular moment. As the case spread through the small coastal towns, each community whispered its version of the tragedy. In the sleepy harbor of Nantucket, locals gathered in low-lit taverns, eyes darting nervously, discussing the link between a disgraced academic and a secret society that operated out of abandoned lighthouses. Detective James Carter, a stalwart investigator with a past of his own, emerged as the community's reluctant guardian against the spread of terror. Detective Carter's perspective was as much a part of the unfolding drama as mine, though our roles were painfully opposed. "We are losing control," he confided to Deputy Lisa Monroe in a hushed tone one rainy night at the station in Portsmouth. "Alexander Blackwood is not a monster born, but one forged from neglect and the darkest betrayals of society. His crime, while unforgivable, never existed in isolation. There is a network, and I'm determined to unravel it piece by piece." His voice, steady and resolute, belied the personal demons he battled. Each clue he uncovered brought him one step closer to a truth that was more tangled than he had ever imagined. As the investigation deepened, conflicting perspectives wove a tapestry of betrayal, despair, and redemption. I was not the only one who suffered under the weight of past decisions. Emily Carter, Detective Carter's estranged daughter, found herself inexplicably drawn to the case. Her life in the small coastal town of Rockport had been marred by personal losses and the absence of paternal warmth. Emily's journey to understand the motives behind the murder was as much about reconciling her own fractured memories as it was about seeking justice for a victim she never met. Late one autumn evening, I found myself reminiscing about the days when nothing seemed lost. Sitting in the cold solitude of my cell, I recalled a time when I was not defined solely by violence. I was a man with dreams, I often muttered to the shadows. The recollections were bittersweet, a past life as a promising architect, a lover, even a friend, and yet, that life was forever altered by an act of unimaginable horror. In the golden light of remembrance, I questioned the dictates of fate and the heavy burden of guilt that had become my constant companion. In parallel, Detective Carter's days were consumed by sleepless nights and relentless pursuit of every shred of evidence. His investigation led him to a derelict mansion on the edge of Cape Ann, a mansion once inhabited by a reclusive family whose ties to the local elite had long since dissipated. There, hidden among dusty ledgers and forgotten photographs, were hints of a clandestine gathering that spanned decades. "There's darkness in the roots of this town," he confided in a shaky tone during a conversation with Monroe. "And sometimes, in order to exorcise one ghost, we must confront even more. The community around these coastal towns was caught in a web of intertwined destinies. In a dimly lit bar in Newport, Rhode Island, I listened to murmurs of the past and secrets shared in hushed conversation. People spoke of the repressive forces that sometimes twist human nature into something monstrous. I recalled the words of Marcus, a local fisherman whose life had intersected with mine in inexplicable ways. "There's a ripple in every wave," he had said one stormy evening. "And every ripple carries a piece of someone's soul." His words haunted me, forcing me to confront the painful reality that perhaps I was merely a symptom of something far greater and more sinister than a single act of violence. Emily Carter's investigation took a personal turn when she discovered old journals and letters in her late mother's belongings. The faded ink revealed long-forgotten grievances and hints of accomplices in a network of corruption that had plagued the coastal region for decades. "I always knew something was off about the way people suddenly lost faith," she confided to her best friend, Olivia Turner, during a tearful midnight conversation in her modest Rockport apartment. "But I never imagined it would be connected to a murderer like Alexander Blackwood." Her searches in local archives, combined with oral histories passed down through generations of fishermen and shopkeepers, slowly began to paint a picture of corruption that extended far beyond one man's revenge. For her, every piece of evidence was a step toward understanding how the darkness in human hearts could bruise so silently over time. Even as the investigation swirled around me, I found solace in the perspectives that emerged from the shattered souls touched by my actions. In a series of reflective letters that I secretly kept hidden from prison guards, I wrote long, tortured notes addressing the families of those whose lives had been upended by events I now deeply regretted. "I once believed that destruction was the only path to liberation," I wrote in one letter addressed to the family of another victim, Andrew Montgomery, a prominent local businessman. "But in your eyes, I saw a glimmer of forgiveness that I cannot even begin to comprehend." And in that moment, I questioned whether life is defined solely by our darkest deeds. These letters, though never delivered, were testament to the fragmented layers of my remorse and the internal battles that would forever haunt me. As the seasons turned, the small coastal towns became unwilling witnesses to a drama that seemed to rewrite their collective history. In a long, melancholic monologue one windy evening, I admitted to an old cellmate in whispered tones, "I sometimes wonder if it is my fate to be remembered not for what I once was, but for what I ended up becoming, a cautionary tale for generations to come." My cellmate, Edward, a man whose own past was riddled with regret, simply nodded. "We are all prisoners of what we do and what we endure," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the clanging of the cell bars. That night, as thunder rolled off the Atlantic and mingled with my own inner tumult, the inevitability of retribution and redemption became intertwined in a web from which there was no escape. Detective Carter's relentless pursuit eventually led him to the center of the tangled mystery, a secret meeting held in an abandoned warehouse near the docks of Salem, Massachusetts. Under flickering fluorescent lights, he confronted a group of shadowy figures whose voices resonated with cold determination. "We are the custodians of the past," one of the conspirators declared in a voice that was both chilling and oddly ceremonious. "Without our sacrifices, the truth of our heritage would be lost." The confrontation spiraled into a furious argument, punctuated with gunshots and desperate shouts as loyalties were torn asunder. In that moment, as chaos erupted all around him, Carter realized that the truth behind my crime and those of others like me was embedded within a centuries-old network that thrived on the exploitation of the vulnerable. Meanwhile, Emily Carter found herself at a precarious crossroads. Torn between her duty as a daughter and her burgeoning need to understand the undercurrents of the mystery, she journeyed to a dilapidated seaside inn in Gloucester, Massachusetts. There, among fading photographs and handwritten guest logs, she met Geraldine Frost, an elderly woman with striking silver hair and deep-set eyes that carried the weight of an era long past. "Your father once told me that every man has a story," Geraldine murmured as she sipped tea in the inn's creaking parlor. "But sometimes, the stories that bind us are more dangerous than any secret we could imagine." Geraldine's words, delivered with a mix of sympathy and sorrow, opened a gateway to a hidden past, one that intertwined with the lives of coastal residents for generations. Her recollections hinted at betrayals, unspoken alliances, and a cycle of violence that had repeated itself like a curse on these lands. As investigative threads wove together, a series of surprising dialogues emerged among those who had been indirectly implicated. One rainy afternoon in the tiny port of Rockport, I overheard a heated discussion between Olivia Turner and a local councilman, Richard Harris, in which the sins of the past were laid bare. "We cannot keep ignoring the crevices in our history," Olivia insisted, her voice trembling with both anger and determination. "The secrets of Brighton, Bar Harbor, and even Salem are intertwined, and one misstep could ignite a conflagration that leaves nothing behind but ash." Richard, his expression schooled into a mask of regret, replied, "I wish I had the strength to erase the past, but some truths are etched in stone. All we can do is confront them and hope for absolution." Their conversation reverberated in my mind, a clash between the heroic pursuit of justice and the inevitable acceptance of human imperfection. The multiple perspectives in our intertwined saga were as diverse as the tides that thundered against the rocky shores. For me, the killer condemned by society, time served as both a punishment and a mirror. I dwelt in memories that were as vivid as they were painful, each recollection digging a wound into the fabric of my existence. "I am the sum of every desperate choice I ever made," I would often whisper to myself during long, sleepless nights. The remorse that gnawed at my soul was not solely for the act of murder, but for the way it had splintered lives and altered destinies far beyond my control. Across the county lines and rugged coastlines, Detective Carter's investigation reached an unsettling crescendo. In a tense confrontation on a foggy pier in Salem, he finally cornered a pivotal witness, a man named Samuel Whitaker. Samuel was a quiet, unassuming librarian whose unpretentious demeanor hid a keen mind privy to decades of municipal secrets. "I saw things you couldn't imagine," Samuel confessed during a private interview in his modest home overlooking the harbor. "There were gatherings under the cloak of night, discussions that hinted at sacrifices and promises. I never believed those whispers would lead to bloodshed. But when Alexander Blackwood took that fateful step, all of us had to pay the price." His words, softly spoken yet forceful, burdened Carter with the solemn duty of untangling not just a murder but a legacy of hidden violence passed down through generations. In the midst of this spiraling drama, the coastal community was forced into uneasy introspection. Every weathered face on the streets of Nantucket echoed the sorrow and suspicion that the case had awakened. The local newspaper, the Nantucket Beacon, ran emotive op-eds that debated whether the true horror lay not in a single man's deed, but in the collective failure to nurture empathy and accountability. "We are a town defined by our history," lamented the editorial by an anonymous writer. "And with every tragedy, we are compelled to confront the dark currents that run beneath our tranquil surface." Even as I listened to these reflections from behind cold, iron bars, I couldn't help but feel that the narrative of my life was merely a chapter in a much larger, tragic parchment of human frailty. One sultry summer morning in the busy docks of Portsmouth, a tense dialogue unfolded between Detective Carter and his protégé, Officer Danielle Pierce. Over cups of bitter coffee in a cramped precinct office, he confided, "Sometimes I wonder if we're chasing shadows. Every clue seems to lead to yet another labyrinth of secrets." Officer Pierce, whose youth and idealism had not yet been dimmed by the harsh realities of the world, responded with earnest resolve, "But isn't that the point of our duty, to shine a light in every dark corner until even the deepest secrets are exposed?" Their conversation, though brief, resonated with the promise of truth and the inevitable price that such revelations demanded. The narrative continued to twist and turn as more voices emerged from the depths of our shared past. In a heartfelt conversation in a tiny coastal cafe in Bar Harbor, I unexpectedly encountered an old friend, Jonathan Miles, who had once tried to pull me back from the brink of my destructive path. Jonathan, now a respected journalist, looked at me with a mixture of pity and genuine concern. "Alexander, you've become a symbol of everything that went horribly wrong," he said quietly, swirling a spoon in his lukewarm tea. "But remember, even in the darkest tales, there lies a sliver of hope for redemption. We are all capable of change, but truth comes with a price, and forgiveness is never handed out lightly. His words, laden with both sorrow and a desire for reconciliation, did little to alleviate the burden of my guilt. Instead, they served as a mirror to the fragmented identity I had long struggled to understand. In a continuous stream of memories, revisited with both regret and reluctant introspection, I began to see my actions not in isolation but as the tragic culmination of personal demons, societal neglect, and a pervasive climate of silence. Each flashback carried me back to that fateful night in Bar Harbor, the sound of splintering wood, the metallic tang of blood mingled with salt water, and the staccato rhythm of my frantic heartbeat. I recalled how, in the milliseconds before everything changed, I had felt a perverse clarity. "This is the end of our suffering," I had murmured to myself, misinterpreting the violence as a liberation from the shackles of my own past miseries. Yet, true liberation remained forever out of reach. In the ensuing days and months, as the investigation tightened like a noose around the neck of the coastal communities, emotional fissures appeared in unexpected places. My trial, a media spectacle that drew in crowds from Lowell to Providence, revealed the paradoxical human capacity to despise and, at the same time, to empathize. Jury members, witnesses, and even hardened criminals who attended proceedings from behind tightly barred windows, each was forced, however reluctantly, to reckon with the stark truth that the boundaries between hero and villain, victim and perpetrator, were far more blurred than they cared to admit. From the confines of my cell, in long, introspective monologues, I wrestled with questions of destiny and accountability. What if I had been given another chance? I wrote in a tattered diary, a confession that would never leave the confines of these cold walls. The diary entries wove together a tapestry of introspection, recollections of lost love with the kind-hearted Victoria Hale, conversations filled with the optimism of youth, and dreams of building sanctuaries on the very shores that had witnessed my darkest acts. Each entry was a plea, a desperate appeal to a past self I could no longer reclaim. Interwoven with my own reflections were the unfolding testimonies of those determined to piece together a collective history. Detective Carter, in his relentless pursuit of closure, began to appreciate that every resident of these coastal towns bore silent witness to historical injustices. In a rare moment of vulnerability during an interview with a local historian in Gloucester, he admitted, "I used to think my duty was merely to catch the criminal. Now, I realize I'm trying to exorcise a legacy of neglect and denial that has haunted these communities for far too long." His admission brought forth a series of flashbacks to his own childhood spent near the turbulent shores of Cape Cod, where every crashing wave seemed to recount the stories of forgotten souls. That self-realization only deepened his resolve, a resolve to peel back layers of history that many preferred left undisturbed. As weeks melded into months, the narrative continued to oscillate between personal confessions and communal reckonings. Emily Carter, driven by an insatiable need to understand both her father's internal conflicts and the roots of a far-reaching conspiracy, embarked on a solitary journey along the rugged cliffs of Maine. There, amidst wind-swept boulders and the ceaseless chant of the Atlantic, she recorded her thoughts in a leather-bound journal. "Every step I take," she wrote one chilly morning in Kittery, "brings me closer to the truth, a truth tangled in regret, betrayal, and the solemn promise of redemption. I fear that in unraveling the threads of this mystery, I might also unravel parts of myself I never knew existed." Her diary entries, raw and introspective, would later become a crucial piece of the mosaic that defined our collective story. Another day brought me an unexpected visitor through the barred window of my cell. It was Officer Danielle Pierce, face set with a mixture of empathy and professional determination. "Alexander," she began hesitantly, "I know you're not the only one tormented by these events." Her gaze softened as she recounted her own early days as a rookie officer on the docks of Salem, where violence and loss had reshaped her understanding of justice. "Sometimes, the path we choose is not the one that defines us, but the one that haunts us," she continued, her voice barely rising above the clamor of distant seagulls. That conversation, like so many others, blurred the line between oppressor and victim, and for a fleeting moment, I sensed a fragile bridge of shared humanity between us. In the midst of these conflicting narratives, a turning point emerged when Detective Carter discovered a link between the secret society behind the coastal subterfuge and a seemingly innocuous local institution, a respected maritime museum in Salem. Late one evening, while digitizing old ship logs and weathered photographs, he uncovered evidence that suggested the museum's founders had been active participants in covert rituals that spanned several generations. "This place holds memories of sacrifices and pacts made in the name of protecting our legacy," he confided to his partner in a hushed telephone conversation. Perhaps Alexander's act was not random, but the culmination of pressures built over decades. His discovery added yet another layer of complexity to an already confounding puzzle. The shifting narratives, from my cold introspection to Carter's determined inquiries and Emily's desperate search for meaning, illustrated that our small coastal towns were far from tranquil. They were living testimonials of intertwined fates, where violence, sorrow, and unexpected compassion coexisted. As I penned these reflections in the solitude of the night, I realized that my story, the story of Alexander Blackwood, was not simply a chronicle of a single act of murder. It was a mirror reflecting a broader, more disquieting truth about society, that sometimes the most damning judgment comes not from the courts, but from the compounded sorrows and betrayals of generations. In a final, heart-wrenching twist, the day of reckoning arrived in the form of an unexpected confession during a televised interview from the trial court in Portsmouth. Surrounded by reporters and hidden cameras, I spoke with a trembling yet resolute voice. "Yes, I committed those acts. I stand by every dreadful moment," I declared, my words echoing through the hushed gallery. "But I ask you all to look deeper, to see beyond the singularity of my crimes. There are darker forces at work here. They exploited our vulnerabilities, and in doing so, created the conditions that made my actions possible." The courtroom erupted in a cacophony of shock and disbelief. Detective Carter, visibly shaken by the confession, could only watch as his own beliefs were further challenged by the revelation that the roots of evil were as convoluted and systemic as the tides that battered our beloved shores. After that day, as the trial concluded and the verdict was rendered, I was left with the unyielding specter of regret. My incarceration deepened into an endless daydream of remorse, memories of faces I could never bring back, and the overwhelming realization that my actions were not simply an isolated sin but a symptom of a far broader malaise. In quiet moments of reflection, I began to understand that the true tragedy lay not in my solitary downfall, but in the cumulative despair of all those whose lives were upended along the way. Even as the coastal communities gradually began to mend their fractured identities, the fragments of our stories continued to resonate like ghostly echoes along the battered piers and windswept dunes. In family gatherings at long-forgotten seaside cottages, in heated debates at town halls, and in the lonely prayers of those seeking solace after loss, our intertwined narratives served as stark reminders that even in moments of great darkness, glimmers of hope, however faint, could emerge. The longing for redemption, the need for understanding, and the ceaseless hope that someday, somewhere, forgiveness might be found, remained the enduring legacies of our shared history. And so, as I conclude this self-reflective journey, a journey that weaves together multiple voices and perspectives from the very heart of small coastal towns, I cannot help but offer a final lamentation on the inexplicable interplay of fate, guilt, and remorse. Each perspective, mine as the condemned killer, Detective Carter's as the relentless seeker of truth, and Emily Carter's as the grieving daughter searching for meaning, tells a piece of a story that is as much about human frailty as it is about the inevitability of consequence. In the luminous darkness of our shared past, the shattered pieces of our identities bind us together in a tapestry of pain, hope, and ultimately, a desperate longing for absolution. Looking back on those turbulent years from the sterility of my prison cell, I am forced to admit that the narrative of Alexander Blackwood is not merely a tale of murder and retribution. It is a chronicle of choices made under the weight of history and collective despair, a reminder that every violent act resonates far beyond the moment of its execution, leaving indelible scars on communities, families, and even the perpetrator's own soul. In a final internal soliloquy, I confess to the silent night one last time: in seeking to destroy the past, I have only magnified its horrors. My legacy is not solely written in blood, but in the sorrow and hope of those I've left behind. May my story serve as a reminder that even the darkest souls cry out for a sliver of redemption. It is a fictional tale and not based on actual events. If you enjoyed the story, subscribe to my channel, like, and check the description to find out how you can support my work.